This is Red Story. Subscribe to my channel, so I'll understand that everything is not in vain. Now let's get started. Title: The Unraveling of Trust. Michael entered his suburban home late on a Wednesday morning. It had been several days since he'd last been there, specifically since Sunday. He didn't plan to stay long. He just wanted to grab a few things and leave again. He assumed his wife, Emily, was already at work, as usual. As Michael walked into the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee, his eyes fell upon a pair of handcuffs and a strip of duct tape, lying on the table where he'd left them. The kitchen towel he tossed aside after wiping his face was still crumpled on the floor. The video camera stood on its tripod near the table, and the broken chair he'd overturned remained exactly where it had fallen. Instead of making coffee, Michael opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of iced tea. At that moment, Emily burst into the kitchen, her voice sharp with anger. "Where the hell have you been?" Michael didn't bother to look at her or respond. Instead, he walked past her toward the bedroom to collect some clothes. She grabbed his arm. "I'm talking to you. I asked where you've been." He stopped, slowly turning to face her. This was the woman he had once loved deeply, the woman he'd married 7 years ago. But now, she was the same woman who had completely shattered his world. "Let go," he said quietly, barely louder than a whisper. Emily studied his face for a moment. It was impassive, his eyes dull and lifeless. Reluctantly, she released her grip, allowing him to continue. She watched as he walked away, her frustration simmering. After a moment, Emily began tidying up the kitchen. She picked up the handcuffs, duct tape, and towel, tossing them unceremoniously into the trash can. She removed the camera from the tripod, set it on the counter, and folded the tripod, placing it aside. Determined to get answers, she followed Michael into the bedroom. Michael opened a suitcase lying on the bed and methodically began folding clothes into it. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, her eyes fixed on him. "Packing," Michael replied curtly, not pausing his task. "Another business trip?" she asked, sarcasm dripping from her voice. He stopped packing and looked at her. "No, and you know that. Does it matter? You're my husband. I have the right to know," she snapped. He took a deep breath. "Emily, you gave up that right last Sunday afternoon." Michael calmly added a few more items to the suitcase, zipped it up, and carried it into the living room, setting it by the front door. From there, he went to his home office, Emily trailing close behind. He grabbed some important documents from his desk, packed them into his briefcase, and neatly stored his laptop and power cord into a computer bag. Returning to the kitchen, Michael picked up the video camera. He flipped it open, confirming the SD card was still inside. "Is this what you recorded on Sunday?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Emily smirked, clearly amused. "A little keepsake from your payback? How thoughtful. Thanks." Michael's face remained unreadable, showing no reaction to her taunt. "For God's sake, Michael, talk to me," she shouted, her frustration boiling over. He turned toward her, a flash of emotion briefly crossing his face. "What did you do to me, Emily? Why are you leaving me like this?" Her voice trembled. "Why are you acting like this? You disappear for days, and now you're packing up without an explanation." "Sit down, let's go over this together," Michael said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. He pulled his laptop from its case, set it on the table, and inserted the SD card. After a moment, he nodded for her to sit. "Let's watch this, and then we'll talk." The screen lit up, showing the kitchen table. An empty chair was on one side, another chair pushed back on the other. Michael appeared on screen, smiling brightly. "Welcome home, baby. Come on into the kitchen. I've got that surprise I promised you on the phone." Emily entered the frame, dressed in a short, sheer robe. Her hair was perfectly styled, makeup flawlessly applied. Barefoot, she carried a pair of handcuffs. Grinning mischievously. "Sit in the chair," she commanded playfully. Michael, still smiling, sat down. Emily stepped behind him, and as she leaned over to cuff him to the chair, her robe fell open, revealing she wore nothing underneath. She swiftly cuffed one of his wrists, looped the chain around the chair, and secured his other wrist. Stepping out of view for a moment, Emily returned with a strip of duct tape, which she pressed gently over Michael's mouth. Despite the tape, his smile was still evident. She positioned herself in front of him and let her robe slip to the floor. Michael's eyes lit up at the sight. "Ready for your surprise?" she teased, a sly smile spreading across her face. Michael nodded eagerly. "We're all set here," Emily called out loudly. The sound of footsteps echoed from another room, growing louder. Michael turned his head toward the noise, confusion flickering in his eyes. A man walked into the frame, wearing one of Michael's robes. The look on Michael's face shifted from joy to shock. "Honey, you remember Jason from my office, right?" Emily asked sweetly. She walked over to Jason, untied the belt on his robe, and let it fall from his shoulders, tossing it into Michael's lap. Michael paused the video, turning to Emily with a simple question. "Why?" Emily didn't hesitate. "You know damn well why." He looked genuinely baffled. "Emily, I honestly don't." Her gaze hardened. "I told you before we got married, remember?" He frowned, trying to recall. "What are you talking about?" "I told you, plain and simple. If you ever cheated on me, I'd make sure you saw me do the same. And I meant it. You remember that, don't you? Is this really what all of this is about? Payback?" Michael asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I told you I'd do it, and I kept my word," she replied, her tone matter of fact. "You think I cheated on you?" he asked, incredulous. "I don't think, Michael. I know you did." He shook his head, baffled. "All right, Emily, when exactly did I cheat on you? Don't play dumb with me. You know when, where, and with whom," she snapped. Without another word, Michael removed the SD card from the laptop, sliding it into his bag. He closed the laptop, packed it up, and zipped the case. Turning to Emily, his patience was wearing thin. "Either explain what you're accusing me of, or I'm walking out right now." Emily glared at him. "Fine. While you were off on your so-called business trip last week, I got a call from Lisa, David's wife. She told me you and David spent the week fooling around with some prostitutes." "Lisa said that?" Michael's brow furrowed in disbelief. "And what evidence did she offer you?" "Drop the innocent act, Michael. You know exactly what you did," she retorted. He stared at her, struggling to comprehend. "So you decided to humiliate me like this based on a phone call?" "Damn right," Emily responded coldly. "You really did all this without even having any proof." "I didn't need proof," she said, crossing her arms. Michael sighed heavily, shaking his head. "So let me get this straight. You tied me to a chair, had sex with another man in front of me, and destroyed our marriage, all because of something someone told you on the phone." "Exactly. It was payback, Michael." He looked at her, still not grasping her reasoning. "You didn't even ask me about it. You jumped straight to judgment without a shred of evidence." "Yes," she affirmed. He took a deep breath. "So you think we're even now?" "Even? Yeah, we're even," she replied defiantly. "Well, it might not matter anymore, but I'd like to say a couple of things before I go." "Go ahead. I'm all ears," Emily said mockingly. "I was at a conference the entire week," Michael began calmly. "David wasn't even there. He was fired 2 months ago for inappropriate conduct with an intern. I haven't seen or spoken to him since. I was a keynote speaker at the conference every day from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. The whole thing was recorded. After the sessions, we had networking events and meetings that ran late into the night. I never left the hotel until I checked out to fly home. I've got witnesses, video recordings, the whole thing. I was there the entire time." "So you're saying it's all a lie?" she asked skeptically. "Of course I'm denying it, Emily," he said, his voice unwavering. "I've got concrete proof of everything I did. Meanwhile, all you got is a phone call from someone who wasn't even there." "But I believe her," Emily snapped. "Believing something doesn't make it true," Michael replied, his tone growing colder. "I used to believe I was married to a kind, loving woman. But after Sunday, I've realized I'm married to someone who would rather humiliate me in the worst way possible based on a rumor." Emily had no response. "I'm leaving," Michael said quietly. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer in the next few days. I'm not divorcing you, Michael. That's why I did this." "Now we're even," she declared. He shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "Emily, I didn't cheat on you. Were you even listening?" "I'm not an idiot, Michael. Of course I was listening." "And you still think this was justified?" "I do," she said without hesitation. "Then we have nothing left to say to each other. Just call Lisa and find out what proof she had, will you? I'd love to know." "It doesn't really matter anymore," Emily muttered, looking down. Michael didn't respond. Without another word, he picked up his bags and left the house. Back at his hotel room, He burned the video footage onto 3 DVDs, knowing he'd need them soon. He already had a meeting scheduled with his lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings on the grounds of adultery. One of the DVDs would serve as evidence to support his case. Thanks to a prenuptial agreement, the process was set to move swiftly. Michael personally delivered the divorce papers to Emily once they were filed. His attorney had advised him to have an impartial witness present when she received them. He decided to handle it in person. He called Emily, and they arranged to meet for lunch at a restaurant they often frequented. When she arrived, Michael was already seated at a quiet table in the back. Emily, looking well put together and perhaps a bit overdone, approached with a hopeful smile. Michael stood, but when she leaned in to kiss him, he turned his cheek. Disappointment flickered across her face as she sat down. "I made a mistake, Michael," Emily began softly. "I want us to move past this and get back to where we were." "I agree. It's time to move forward," he replied, his tone cool. When their longtime waitress, Linda, approached, Emily said, "2 iced teas, please." Michael stopped Linda before she left. "Actually, Linda, could you stay for just a moment?" He reached into his bag and pulled out the divorce papers, handing them to Emily. "These are the divorce papers. Linda is here as my witness that you've officially been served." "Thank you, Linda." Emily's face paled as she stared at the documents. Linda, sensing the tension, quietly excused herself. "I thought we were going to put this behind us," Emily said, her voice trembling. "We are. This is me moving forward," Michael responded. "But that's not what I meant. I made a mistake," she pleaded, her eyes searching his. Michael's voice softened slightly, but his words were firm. "Emily, we've been married for over 7 years, until last Sunday. Those were the best years of my life. I loved you more than anything, and I don't think I'll ever love anyone like that again. Don't throw that away. We had something special," she insisted. "We had something special. It's gone now. Last Sunday, you broke our marriage, and with it, destroyed the love I had for you. It was a mistake. Can't you see that?" He shook his head. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you now, or even when I close my eyes. I no longer see the woman I cherished. You killed her that day." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "It was a mistake, Michael. You know that." "No," he replied sternly. "What you did wasn't a mistake. The reason behind it might have been, but your actions were intentional." She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I warned you. I told you that if you ever cheated on me, I'd get revenge in the worst way. You knew what would happen." "Yes, I agreed because I never thought it would come to that," he shot back. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What did I tell you I'd do if you cheated?" "You said you'd divorce me," he replied. "And you agreed," he said. "I did. But I didn't cheat on you, Emily." Michael pulled a DVD from his bag and slid it across the table. "Here, this is for you, a copy of your little revenge moment with Jason." Her face crumpled. "It wasn't cheating, Michael. It was payback." Linda returned briefly to drop off their drinks, then left them alone. "Emily, what you did was adultery. Whether you call it revenge or not, it's still cheating. Unless both people agree to it, it doesn't change what it is." "We can work this out," she said desperately. "We can go to counseling, talk through this." "No," he interrupted, his tone final. "There's no fixing this. You showed me a side of you I didn't know existed, and it killed the woman I loved. You didn't just hurt me. You tore my heart out." "I don't want a divorce," she said firmly. "I'll fight you on this." Michael's expression hardened. "On Sunday, I saw a part of you I never imagined. But you know what? I have a side too, Emily, and you don't want to see it." She looked confused. "What side is that?" "The side that can be just as ruthless and cruel as you were. But unlike you, I won't use a mistake as an excuse. If I do something, I'll own it completely." She shook her head. "That's not who you are, Michael. You're not like that." He smirked bitterly. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." "Damn it, Michael, it was a mistake," she snapped, tears streaming down her face. "No, it was a cold, calculated act of revenge," he replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. She looked defeated. "When did you tell your parents?" "I told them we had a disagreement, but that we'd figure it out," she admitted, staring down at the table. "About what?" he pressed. "I told them you were having an affair," she whispered. "You lied to them," he said, disbelief evident in his voice. "They wouldn't understand the truth," Emily confessed, her voice shaking. Michael sat back, arms crossed. Understand what? That you acted on a baseless rumor and destroyed our marriage. I know what I did was wrong, she said quietly. You hurt me deeply, Emily. You acted on assumption rather than fact. You can't just sweep that under the rug. I know I messed up, but we can work through this. We can rebuild our marriage. We can leave this behind. He nodded slowly. You're right. We'll put this marriage behind us. The woman I loved is gone now. Her eyes flashed with determination. I'll fight for this, Michael. I'm not giving up on us. I'm saving this marriage. There's nothing left to save, he said coldly. It's over. Don't make me show you the side of me you haven't seen. You won't like it, she scoffed. You're bluffing. Don't push me, he warned. Get a lawyer, have them look over the petition, and tell them to talk to my attorney if you have questions. You'll be single in 90 days, and Jason will be free for you anytime you want. This has nothing to do with Jason, she snapped. You're right. That was rude of me. I'm sorry. But I'm not walking out on you, Emily. You already have, she shot back. You've already left. The settlement is fair. Just accept it and move on. No way in hell. Michael stood up, leaving his untouched drink on the table. Enjoy your lunch, Emily. I lost my appetite last Sunday when you spat on everything we had. He turned and walked away. A few days later, Emily sat across from her new lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel Stevens, who came highly recommended. Please have a seat, Mrs. Thompson, Rachel said, motioning to the chair. What brings you in today? My husband's trying to divorce me. Has he served you the papers? Rachel asked. Yes, last Friday, Emily said, handing over the documents. Rachel scanned the first page. He's citing adultery. Is that accurate? Emily hesitated. It's more complicated than that. It was all a misunderstanding. Were you involved with someone outside your marriage? Rachel inquired. Emily nodded. Yes, but it wasn't like that. It was a mistake. Did your husband give consent for this relationship? Not exactly for this person, but we had an agreement. He said if he ever cheated on me, I could get revenge. So in a way, he knew. So your husband cheated on you, and you retaliated. Well, yes and no, Emily replied, fidgeting. Rachel looked puzzled. Mrs. Thompson, could you explain that? Emily sighed. I thought he cheated, so I had a revenge affair. Then I found out he wasn't cheating. Rachel looked at her sharply. Let me get this straight. Your husband wasn't unfaithful, but you still went through with a revenge affair. Yes, Emily whispered. Mrs. Thompson, that's still considered adultery. But I thought he cheated, Emily protested. What proof did you have? A friend told me he did. And your friend was wrong. Yes, Emily admitted, her voice small, but it was a mistake. Rachel sighed deeply. Based on what you've told me, you acted on hearsay and retaliated without real evidence. Does your husband have any proof of your affair? Emily swallowed hard. Yes, I handcuffed him to a chair and made him watch. Rachel's expression tightened. Is there actual evidence of this? I videotaped it, Emily confessed, handing over the DVD Michael had given her. Rachel's eyes widened. You filmed it? May I watch this? Emily nodded, looking down at her hands as Rachel inserted the DVD. After a few minutes, Rachel paused the video and shook her head. I'll have to review the whole thing later, but this is very damaging. Let me look over the petition more closely. After reviewing the documents, Rachel said, it appears you signed a prenuptial agreement that's quite solid, especially regarding adultery. If we can convince him to change the grounds to irreconcilable differences, we might bypass the prenuptial clause. But that could be challenging. Even with the prenup, he's offering you more than the minimum required by law. I don't care about the money. I want my husband back, Emily said firmly. Did you tell him that? I did, and he didn't consider it, she said, her voice breaking. Contested divorces can get very ugly and expensive, Rachel warned. We need counseling. We can fix this. All right, we'll request counseling and let him know that if he refuses, we'll fight for every asset we can. Okay, Emily agreed. Do you have any leverage on your husband? Anything we could use? Emily shook her head. He's as clean as they come. Never done anything wrong. Has he ever hit you or threatened you? Not once. He's never even yelled at me, she admitted. Rachel sighed. I'll go through the paperwork thoroughly, finish watching the video, and get back to you. Does he have a copy of this recording? Yes, Emily confirmed. By Wednesday, Rachel called her back. Mrs. Thompson, your husband has a strong case. That video is extremely damaging, and you really don't want a judge to see it. We're going to start by offering 6 weeks of couples counseling. Whatever it takes. I need him back, Emily replied desperately. 2 days later, Michael received a call from his lawyer. They'd requested 6 weeks of counseling. His lawyer said, "What if I refuse?" Michael asked. "They're prepared to fight us on everything if you don't agree." Michael considered this. "I'm not inclined to agree, but what you think?" She hired Rachel Stevens, a top divorce attorney, his lawyer informed him. "Are you better than her?" Michael asked. "Absolutely," his lawyer replied confidently. "But it could get messy." Michael sighed. "Let's decline the counseling and see what they do next." That evening, Michael called Emily. "I've decided against counseling. I warned you that if you kept pushing, you'd see a side of me you wouldn't like. Why are you doing this? Just stop with this divorce nonsense and come home," Emily pleaded. "That's not going to happen. This is your last chance to take the easy way out. I won't be calling you again. I'm fighting this, Michael. I don't want a divorce." "Have it your way," he said, ending the call. The following Monday, Emily filed a countersuit, citing irreconcilable differences and demanding a significant portion of their assets. 2 days later, Emily's world began to crumble. The school where she worked received anonymous packages containing explicit photos and details of her affair with Jason, who was also married. An emergency meeting was called, and both Emily and Jason were terminated. That same evening, Jason's wife, Sarah, received a package with the DVD and a note detailing the affair. After watching the footage, she filed for divorce. The fallout was swift and brutal. Jason called Emily, furious that her actions had destroyed both their careers and marriages. Despite everything, Emily refused to back down. She held on to the hope that she could salvage her marriage. Another week passed with no communication from Michael or his lawyer. Determined, Michael escalated his efforts. He sent copies of the DVD to Emily's parents and her sister, Megan. Emily's family confronted her, devastated by her actions. "How could you do this?" Her mother cried. "We raised you better than this." "I made a mistake," Emily sobbed. "But Michael is taking it too far. He's only reacting to what you've done," Megan pointed out gently. "You need to let this go." "I can't," Emily insisted. "I won't lose him." Her father spoke up. "Emily, you've already lost him. The more you fight, the worse it gets." Emily's family urged her to drop the countersuit and accept the divorce quietly, but she refused. A few days later, suggestive flyers featuring Emily began circulating around her neighborhood and social circles. Her phone was inundated with harassing messages. Her car was vandalized, her home egged. Overwhelmed, Emily called her lawyer. "I want to drop the countersuit," she said, defeated. "I can't take this anymore." "Are you sure?" Rachel asked. "Yes," Emily confirmed. "I just want it to end." She requested a meeting with Michael, who agreed on the condition that it be held at his attorney's office. When Emily walked into the room, she looked worn, her eyes hollow, her demeanor subdued. "Emily," Michael acknowledged as he sat across from her. "I've dropped the countersuit," she said quietly. "You won." He shook his head. "No, Emily, there's no winning here. We both lost." "I'm sorry you had to see that side of me," she whispered. "I don't know what else to say." He looked at her, a mix of sadness and resignation in his eyes. "I don't know you anymore. I can't even find work." "Everyone knows," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We've both lost a lot," he agreed softly. She stood up, reaching out as if to hug him. "Please, Michael, just one more chance." He took a step back. "I can't, Emily. It would feel like betraying myself." "Is there anything I can do?" she asked desperately. He paused. "You could say I'm sorry. Just once." She met his gaze. "I'm sorry, Michael, for everything." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." With that, he turned and walked out, closing the door on that chapter of his life.